Greg, here we have another lament being performed by a woman.
Yes.
And so this is Briseis, but she's mourning for Patroklos, and I think one thing that's interesting is she's mourning for him because of the way that Patroklos had actually consoled her in the past by promising her a wedding to Achilles.
Yes.
So we're sort of getting this merging of traditions.
Merging of traditions, merging of identities, merging of feelings.
Merging of laments.
And merging of laments. But what's uncanny is that what triggers her associations is the sight of Patroklos all cut up and the pitiful sight of that. And suddenly she has a flashback of her own husband who's cut up in the same way and how she lamented then. So there's a transfer from how she lamented for her husband and for her past life. And now she is lamenting for somebody, and the future isn't clear here, and the relationships aren't clear here, because all that's happening is that the kinder, gentler side of Achilles, that's Patroklos, is nice to her. Achilles hasn't been nice to her. And what will Achilles do with her? You don't really know. There's so many uncertainties. And in a sense, she's building on her emotional traumas of the past, extending them to her present. And then, in a sense, it's this public statement of vulnerability. And it's, of course, very erotic. And we talked in another context, didn't we, about how lament is aestheticized always. And it's eroticized most of the time. And even when you don't expect the erotic element, you still get it. And it's no accident here that Briseis looks like Aphrodite herself. Just as when Andromache is about to do her first of 3 laments in Iliad VI, you remember how her hairdo, when it gets undone, turns out to have been somehow connected with a gift from Aphrodite at Andromache's wedding. So Aphrodite and the erotic aura of Aphrodite are involved in Andromache's lament too, just as they are even more directly here. Here she's looking like golden Aphrodite. And you say, well, what's sensual about this? Well, it's the medium. It's not just her. It's not just that she's very beautiful. It's the medium. The medium is so evocative of happy moments. And we've seen that at weddings, it's perfectly okay to sing songs of tragic endings to love affairs. So it's not that this kind of singing would be inappropriate even to a wedding.
The wedding comes up in this context.
And the wedding comes up in this context. So there's a wonderful continuum in the song culture. This is something I learned from Margaret Alexiou, who would keep telling her students that just because something is a lament doesn't mean that you kind of put it on a shelf. Okay, this is the lament shelf, because the same kind of things you might see in a love song. And sometimes the things that you expect in a love song happen in a lament, and vice versa. So there's a real continuum. When somebody is born, when somebody dies, you can have moments that are deeply personal and deeply physical and have lots of experiences tied into them. And in one case it's death, in the other case it's birth. It really sometimes doesn't matter in a song culture because the important thing is communication. That's more important than sometimes even the specific occasion. Now let's look at the group. So we understand, well, we're starting to understand how Briseis feels, but how do we really know about all those other captive women who are part of the group of women here, who are, shall we say, the backdrop, and who are singing and moving their bodies, let's say dancing antiphonally in response to the sorrow of the soloist of the moment. Technically, every one of those women could sing their own solo. But what happens when there's one soloist? In a sense, you merge your emotions and your own experiences with the experiences that Briseis is expressing. But the language of the epic says this so clearly and so insightfully. is that, yeah, they're mourning for Patroklos, but what else are they doing? They're also mourning for their own personal sorrows. And imagine all the stories of all these members of the group and how they're now all merged into this one experience. And even that one experience is vicarious, because you're asking yourself, well, who is Briseis really crying for? Is she really crying for Patroklos? Yes, in a way, but she's also crying for her husband all over again. And all those emotions are triggered by this particular moment. In film, sometimes this can be captured beautifully by the technique of flashback. I think of the film called Night of the Hunter, where a little boy at the end of the story sees the villain arrested, and suddenly he has a flashback of how his father had been arrested in an earlier phase of his young life, and different situations. In this case, the person who's arrested is the one you love to hate. The other case, it was somebody you loved very much, but nevertheless, there are these convergent situations. The synapse is fired, and the emotions that are triggered by the song are unleashed. And meanwhile, are we really the audience? We're really sucked in as a group ourselves, and this is the beauty of this kind of medium. The experiences of the characters, these larger-than-life characters, pull us all in and engage our own emotions and our own experiences. And those experiences are not just, oh, when grandfather died, or when my older brother died, or when my sister died, or whatever. It's also the first time I heard this, the second time I heard this, the umpteenth time that I heard this part of the Iliad performed publicly.
So it's about reliving performance.
It's reliving.
So you used the term transfer earlier.
Yes.
And we were talking,
Yes.
but you're also talking about merging of feelings. So is
The
this
transfer and
metaphor?
merging.
Is this metonymy? What do you think?
Well, if we go back to Greg's working definition, and it's just a working definition, if metaphor is substitution, and metonym is connection, in a sense, there are a lot of situations where by making a substitution, you're making new connections.
Yeah.
And I like to think of the two, metaphor and metonym, as always working together, just as the vertical threads of a web, which let's say are the organizing principle, and then horizontal threads of a web, which are how you go from A to B to C to D. They really work together, and that's the web, that's the fabric, and you can't separate them.